but they're leaving now.
It got noisy last night.
It was pretty noisy last night.
Yeah.
Fireworks didn't stop going off until like 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Oh.
I was only up till about 1. So.
All right.
Going crazy.
It says that my browser does not currently recognize any of the video formats.
Uh-oh.
I know.
On the
Ivan, your apple cider is overflowing there with foam.
I see.
Your apple cider, it looks like it's foaming.
Oh yeah, it's a little too much, a little too foamy over here.
All right, so we are good, and we're going to go ahead and start to record. We are live, and so see. I see we are live on YouTube, and whenever you're ready, Alvin.
Okay, I will call the Planning and Preservation Committee meeting on the 12th of October to order. Michelle, do the roll call, please.
All right, good evening, Chairperson and members of the Commission. This is a roll call for the Planning and Preservation Commission for October the 12th, 2020. And we are starting at 6:40 p.m. Chairperson Alvin Durham.
Here.
Vice Chair Hector Pacheco.
Present.
Commissioner Ivan Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner Aida Montes. Commissioner Marvin Perez.
Present.
Okay, so let the record reflect that Commissioner Montes is absent.
What do we have on iPhone?
That is Marvin.
That's me. Yeah.
Okay. Then if we can, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay.
There you go.
Ready to begin? I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, now we're already clean balls. Now, do we need to approve the agenda for this evening since it's going to be a one-way ticket?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Then I would take a motion to approve the agenda.
A motion to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second that.
Any objections?
No, sir.
Motion's approved. I think now it's over to you, Tim. No, we don't have any public statements or that stuff tonight, right?
When I last checked, there weren't any emails, and I haven't received any phone calls.
Okay. And the consent calendar. I don't see anything on this that needs to be worried about. Do we need to approve the consent calendar since we don't have one?
Yes, there are minutes of the July 13th Planning and Preservation Commission meeting.
Approval of minutes, that's right. Okay, so then we need to approve the consent calendar. Do I have a motion for that, please?
I motion to approve the minutes.
A second?
Second.
Any objections? Minutes are approved. And now we're down to, do we have any other old business that we have not discussed? Or unfinished business, whichever. I don't think so.
No, none at this time.
Okay, so then let's go to new business, and I think that means it's up to Tim.
Thank you, Chair Durham and Commissioners. So this is a update. It'll be very similar to an update that I provided last week to City Council, and it gives you an overview of what's going on at the state level, at the regional level within Southern California, and how recent laws and the governor's actions lead to sort of local impact here for San Fernando. This is a process that occurs on a cycle, an approximate eight-year cycle for our housing elements, which is the element is one of the major, say, chapters of the city's general plan, and the general plan being really the governing planning document for the city and for the vision of the city's development. Just to give some background, because staff has been working on our end for quite some time on just the development of what we call the sixth cycle, which is the upcoming cycle for the housing element. As you'll recall, I've previously given updates to the Commission on the city's progress in meeting what we call the RENA numbers. That's an abbreviation for the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Allocation. And in essence, that's a number that is generated at the state level by the State Community Development and Housing Department. And then it's divided up to the various regions of the state and apportioned, and then the regions then apportion those out to the local governments, and us being sort of the at the bottom of the chain there. What that ends up with is we're provided an allocation of housing units to produce over an 8-year period. So currently we're on the 5th cycle of the housing, the RENA allocation process, which spanned from about 2013 until next year, 2021. The allocation that we currently have, we've been working over the years to fulfill, and it's really a goal. It's a target, and historically over the various cycles, this target number, it hasn't necessarily been punitive if you don't meet it, but it is important to, one, have a plan where you would be able to provide that number of housing units, and then two, show your progress towards actually fulfilling that over the 8-year period. So the plan is the update that we do every 8 years or so to our housing element, which is really just that chapter of the general plan. So that is the one component of the general plan that gets regularly updated every 8 years. So housing, since the 5th cycle was being developed back in 2011, 2012, it was a very maybe it's not a very different time than what we're living through right now. Back then, we were still coming out of the effects of the Great Recession. Economic activity worldwide had been depressed, and that reflected in just the overall production of housing and construction activity. What that led to is relatively achievable and realistic numbers for the housing allocation for the current cycle. In San Fernando, that allocation was 217 units. And those 217 units are then divided into sort of income categories, from very low income to low to moderate to above moderate. And so there are target numbers that you're trying to build in each of those 4 categories over the housing cycle. Some things haven't changed. We're in the middle of a global recession. Fast forward to 2020 for very different reasons. However, in the interim period, there's been a rapid expansion in the economy up till 2020. There has been a tremendous increase in the issues facing for people experiencing homelessness. in Southern California and the state as a whole. There is a widely recognized housing crisis statewide. So the issue has definitely risen in profile in terms of just the production and the focus on the production of housing statewide. That is reflected in the numbers that were issued for this upcoming 6th cycle of the RHNA allocation. Knowing that this was coming, the city staff has been involved in the process with our regional planning agency, SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, which governs 88 cities and counties of the Southern California area. In accordance with council direction, back in September of last year, staff submitted a letter to SCAG regarding the proposed methodology for SCAG to divide out the RHNA allocation. There was concerns about how those numbers were getting shifted from some parts of Southern California to other parts. Ultimately, in November of last year, the SCAG's governing body, the Regional Council, approved an alternative RHNA allocation methodology. That was proposed by Mayor Rusty Bailey from the city of Riverside, and it shifted a greater proportion of the allocation of housing units away from inland counties. On March 5th of this year, the SCAG Regional Council adopted a final RHNA methodology that was consistent with and was blessed by ultimately the State Department of Housing and Community Development. That determination for the SCAG region was 1,341,827 total homes for SCAG to distribute among its local government. On May 7th, the Regional Council then voted to delay adopting what they call the Connect SoCal plan by up to 120 days, which then postponed them issuing to local governments like San Fernando our draft RHNA allocation. So what was our number of that 1.3 million going to be? We were supposed to find out back in March. They delayed it because they needed to adopt the Connect SoCal plan, which is a regional transportation plan that had some inputs into what the calculation for everybody's number was going to be. In addition, the Regional Council approved a RHNA appeals procedure. So if local jurisdictions wanted to appeal their number, this was the rules for doing so. On September 3rd, the Regional Council for SCAG ultimately adopted the Connect SoCal plan. And the following day, September 4th, SCAG formally issued to its local governments notification of the allocation. For San Fernando, that included 1,791 housing units. And it also included the RHNA appeals procedures. So I'll walk through those. On October 5th, staff presented an update to council regarding the allocation and received recommendations from the council. The breakdown and the context of these numbers. So let me give you some of the context. The current 5th cycle that we're in right now, the city's RHNA allocation was 217 units. So we went from 217 units in the current 5th cycle to this upcoming cycle that will run from 2021 through 2029. We went from 217 to 1,791. So that represents over a more than 800% increase over the 5th cycle. That is, to give broader context, attributed to the state increasing the housing need from the SCAG region, from the Southern California region, from during the current cycle, fifth cycle, of 438,000 units. So we went from 438,000 to 1.34 million for the Southern California region. As part of the RHNA appeals procedure, staff will be preparing to submit an appeal regarding San Fernando's draft RHNA allocation by the final deadline of October 26th of this month. We'll give some additional breakdowns here. So we received this allocation, 1,791 units. Included in your packet, you also have information on the allocations that were proposed for all of the SCAG local governments. So if you want to look through that, you've got that. You've also got the letter that we sent to SCAG regarding our comments on the methodology, which ultimately was not what they went with. They ended up going with the Riverside methodology. You have the formal letter that was issued to us last month from SCAG with our allocation. And to give you some more insight into that, as I mentioned earlier, there are these 4 income categories that this 1,700 number breaks out into. And ours, for the very low, is 460 of those units. At the low income is 273. At the moderate income level is 283. At the above moderate income level is 775, the remaining balance of those. The appeals procedure you also have as attachment C in your packet, and I'll just walk through a little bit of that for you just to give a sense of what staff is going to be undertaking when we submit an appeal, and for better or worse, the limitations of what we can appeal and on what bases we can appeal. So, only local jurisdictions that have received an allocation can submit an appeal, and the basis can only be upon the criteria that's provided, and they really limit it to 3 main categories. Those 3 main categories are methodology, or the local planning factors and information that we submitted through a fair housing survey that SCAG had requested. And then the third and final category is changed circumstances. So I'll walk through what those 3 categories mean. The first one is methodology, and that really comes down to that SCAG failed to determine the jurisdiction's allocation in accordance with their methodology. That means basically if they perform some math error calculation, and that would be a basis. Staff's, reviews of the numbers, there doesn't immediately appear to be a computational error in the allocation. The second one is local planning factors and information affirmatively furthering fair housing. That's pertaining to information that we submitted to SCAG relating to certain local factors affecting housing, and those are listed on page 2 of attachment C in your packet. And those are, each jurisdiction's existing and projected jobs and housing relationship, opportunities and constraints to development for additional housing, the distribution of household growth assumed for purposes of comparable periods of a comparable period of regional transportation plans and opportunities to maximize the use of public transportation, any agreements between government agencies related to designated areas for agricultural or preservation protection. Those don't, those aren't relevant to San Fernando. The loss of units contained in assisted housing developments, that doesn't pertain to San Fernando. The percentage of existing households at each income level listed within their data that is paying more than 30% and more than 50% of their income in rent. We didn't see any data error calculations there. The rate of overcrowding, housing needs of farm workers, again, doesn't pertain to San Fernando. The housing needs generated by the presence of a private university or CSU or UC school, that doesn't pertain to us. The loss of units during a state of emergency declared by the governor, that does not pertain to us. The region's greenhouse gas emissions targets provided by the State Air Resources Board, and information based on issues, strategies, and actions included in an analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. So those are those categories. And lastly, the third main basis on which we can appeal is the category of change in circumstances. And that example is basically, a significant unforeseen change in circumstance. My understanding is really the intent of that is, for example, a community that suffered wildfires over the last couple of years, where you lost a very significant portion of the existing housing stock and infrastructure. That would be a change in circumstance. Does the coronavirus and the impacts of COVID-19 count as a changed circumstance? I don't know. And we don't have guidance on that. Certainly every jurisdiction could, present that as a change in circumstance. Will it fly with SCAG? Chances are probably slim, because that I don't believe was the intent of that basis. Now, I want to spend just a minute to walk through the next portion, which is just as critical, which are the limits on the scope of appeal. So there are certain criteria that they have made explicit that they will not consider when considering an appeal. And those include basically any other criteria other than the criteria that I've already provided. They will not consider a local jurisdiction's existing zoning ordinance and land use restrictions, including the local jurisdiction's general plan. They will not consider any local ordinance, policy, voter-approved measure, or standard limiting residential development. So that is not a criteria that you can appeal based off of. And any such ordinance, policy, measure, or standard that directly or indirectly limits the number of residential building permits shall not be a justification for determination or reduction in the reallocation for a city. Another criteria that is not eligible for appeal as an appeal basis is prior underproduction of housing in a jurisdiction from the previous cycles. So, and lastly, another criteria that is not an eligible basis, stable population numbers in a jurisdiction. The hearing body for these appeals hearings is the SCAG RENA subcommittee, and they are the judge, jury, and executioner. So whatever their determination is final. The understanding of the time frame is local jurisdictions will have until October 26th to submit appeals, and actually local jurisdictions do have the ability to appeal the reallocations of other jurisdictions if they so choose. So then SCAG will schedule these appeal hearings. They'll presumably happen throughout the winter, and a final determination will be made by the appeals board. Here's sort of how it gets even more complicated. if a jurisdiction successfully appeals their arena allocation, so let's say a jurisdiction is able to successfully appeal 200 units of their arena allocation, what happens to those 200 units?
They go somewhere. Yeah.
It gets redistributed proportionally to all of the jurisdictions, including the jurisdiction that successfully appealed it. So let's say you appealed 200 units, you're actually going to get a proportion of those 200 units back, even though you got a successful appeal. So, you know, what I don't want to convey is a whole lot of optimism that, you know, there would be any substantial change to arena allocation through the appeals process. If anything, it's sort of a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, you know, we're going to make our best effort, and you know, we'll see what happens. You know, big picture, you know, this is, you know, and you can certainly look through just the regional number that SCAG received. You can look at, you know, the allocations that other cities received. I mean, all of these numbers are just so big that I don't know how realistic it will be for most, if not all, jurisdictions to even come close to not A, planning for these this many units, and then B, actually even knowing where to begin to even trying to come close to actually issuing enough building permits for these units. So what does that all mean? Could there be litigation? Could there be future legislation at the state level? I think all of those are realistic potential, impacts that will play out over the next, several months as it relates to this. And the last thing I'll just mention is just ultimately, what are the effects? So what are the effects of this sixth cycle? What are the effects of meeting these numbers? What are the effects of not meeting these numbers? And what are the effects of not meeting the first step, which is actually planning to meet these numbers? So currently what's on the books in terms of state law, is we are required each year in the springtime to provide an update, submit an update to the state of our annual progress. And it's literally called an annual progress report that we submit, and we let the state know how many building permits for housing units we issued over the prior year. I'm happy to report that San Fernando, we were allocated 217 units during the current fifth cycle. We've built over 260 units, or we've issued building permits for more than 260 units during this time period, and we still have a couple years to go. That's the good news. The odd part about it is we haven't actually, of the four categories, very low, medium, above, moderate, above moderate, we've actually hit the numbers for two of the categories, but not the other two. And you don't get credit for overproducing in some of the other categories if you don't hit the other ones. So the specificity of these rules can make you dizzy. So what is the penalty if you don't meet these numbers? The penalty is this, and to give broader context, almost no cities under the fifth cycle are actually on pace to meet their housing numbers. Almost none of these cities in the SCAG region. It is a small fraction, and frankly, about 2-3 years ago, when the first progress, that sort of halfway point progress report card was announced, and there was a lot of publicity about it, only 13 jurisdictions of 88 in the Southern California region were on pace to meet their numbers. and San Fernando was one of them. One of 13 of 88.
Yeah.
And since that time, a number of jurisdictions aren't even, some of those 13 have fallen off the list, and unfortunately, we're one of them. So we're not on track to meet at least one of those income categories by the time this fifth cycle is up. So what's the effect? What's bottom line? What's the penalty? So under current state law, the effect is if we're not meeting our arena numbers, then there are certain types of housing, affordable housing developments that are eligible for streamlined approval in the city. And so we basically lose our ability to have sort of discretionary approval of a housing development type project that meets a long list of criteria in order to be able to qualify. That law went into effect in 2018. And, to be quite frank, the law has not been popular so far. And I want to say that there have been 2 projects in the entire state since that time that have utilized that streamlining process. I think there may be a third one in process, but it has not been popular, and I'm not aware of a single project in the SCAG region. I believe one was in city and county of San Francisco, and there was one somewhere, perhaps in San Diego, but not in the SCAG region. That's really it. And the reason for that being the types of projects that are eligible for the streamlining, they would have to meet criteria that would make them such a high quality project that is probably a project you want in your community anyway. And it also has to pay prevailing wage. It can't displace existing housing, or it can't replace, be on a site where there was housing within the last 10 years. So, and there's a number of other criteria, and as you get through the various levels of criteria for a project that would, qualify for this streamlining, it's a very small, the funnel just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So and that's really it right now, would be that type of project would get streamlined for its approvals to move forward. Nothing's come forward in San Fernando over the past couple of years. It just hasn't been, it hasn't created like a fire hose of new affordable housing developments trying to take advantage of this. And I don't see that changing rapidly anytime soon. That's really the only stick that the state has thus far for communities that aren't meeting their RENA allocation. That, of course, could change with legislation at the state level, one way or the other. I don't have a crystal ball at what direction that would go, but certainly with the numbers that have been provided to communities now with this 6th cycle, and Southern California is not alone in this, this heavy lift for housing over the next 8 years. If you go 2 different ways, they could say, hey, well, we really need to compel communities to produce housing, so we're going to put more teeth behind this and make it more punitive if you don't meet it. Or they could say, why would we make it more punitive when we gave folks such unrealistic numbers to try to hit? I don't know which way the state is going to go. I don't think anyone knows at this point. But that is, and that is the very long-winded explanation, and hopefully that was helpful. Happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you so much.
Tim, is there going to be any consideration for our light rail project? Is that going to hurt us, help us?
Very good question. I'll frame that in terms of the methodology. So the methodology, as I mentioned, a part of that, the inputs into that were was that Connect SoCal plan, which was the regional transportation plan.
Right.
Why is that important for housing allocation? That's important because one of the variables for the allocations were a community's proximity to high quality transit.
Yeah.
So if you had access to high quality transit, then your community actually received more housing units. So the idea there being, it cuts two different ways. The idea there being, hey, if you're close to a subway, if you're close to a bus rapid transit line, then, housing around those lines is kind of what we're looking for in terms of making it easier for people to commute. Fair enough. However, what it also does is it really lets communities off the hook that have resisted having public transportation. So if your community is like, I don't want trains, I don't want Metrolink, I don't want light rail, I don't want buses coming to our community, then you got a smaller allocation. And that burden then got shifted onto communities that have, been more receptive to public transportation. The challenge with that is public transportation, in many respects, it lies in areas that are not Beverly Hills,
Yep.
that are not Palos Verdes,
Yep.
that are lower income communities. So, does that sort of further exacerbate, you're putting a burden on lower income communities to generate and produce housing. They make up for they do some make up for that in some of the other variables within the equation. But to make a long story short, that we have planned transit, and we already have transit here with the Metrolink and with all our bus lines that run through and connect with San Fernando. Ultimately, we're considered a huge chunk of the city is considered high quality transit areas.
Right. Have they thought about the high numbers of folks that are moving out of the state? We've lost something like 260,000 people this last year. That kind of makes you look around and like in Santa Cruz, they're building houses everywhere you can see, and yet not enough. I don't get it. I'm having a hard time with that one.
Yeah, let me give some context on that because this stuff, for me, I'm challenged because I think we all, when we step out of our homes, we see what's going on in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
We see people that are really struggling. At the same time, I have a lot of formal education in economics. So I understand laws of supply and demand. Trying to marry those two things, especially when it comes to mandating a region build 1.3 million housing units
right.
in an 8-year period, that kind of defies a lot of economic theory.
Yep.
But the broader context is this. Governor Newsom, he declared when he, early in his term as governor, he declared, statewide that he expected to see 5 million housing units be produced over the next 8 or so years. That number, relating to perceived housing need in the state. I can't make a judgment on that. All I can say is that, ultimately, the governor subsequently, made comments to the media, was quoted to the media saying, well, those numbers, those numbers are more of a reach. And
Yeah.
yet, was the direction that was provided to the state housing department was really similar numbers, which informed, handing down the 1.34 million to SCAG over this housing cycle. And so you're like, well, okay, so you gave us a number that was based on something that you're now admitting was a reach. And now these communities are, they're going to have to replan their communities for potential upzoning, potential rezoning, just to have a plan that could even come close to, accommodating this many housing units over the next 8 years, based on a reach. So is that good policy? Is that good policy making? That may be a question. But nonetheless, I could never advise the commission or the council or our community to not do our best efforts to try to comply with state law. So I would never recommend that, but I can tell you from a realistic standpoint how practical and realistic it is.
All right. Yeah, because we had done a pretty good job on our last housing input. We were something like about 80%.
Yeah. So as of we provided our 2019 update back in April, and we've produced over our RENA allocation. We've hit our targets for 2 of the 4 income categories up to date. We still have some work to do on the other 2. I think we will ultimately achieve a 3rd one by the end of the housing cycle. The 4th one, however, unless a larger scale, very low income project comes forward, I don't see us meeting that target.
Yeah, I was concerned because we don't have but 3 or 4 decent sized lots, and those are mostly downtown, to put into housing. That's going to be hard to do.
Are ADUs considered units?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Pacheco, Chair Durham. So that's a point I definitely wanted to touch upon, which is the importance of accessory dwelling units in this plan. So, interestingly enough, you rewind back to when the 5th cycle was being developed back in 2011, 2012. Very few people knew what the hell an accessory dwelling unit was. Fast forward to 2020, it is on every, it is totally in vogue now.
Yeah, sure.
And just as a refresher, last year, state law changed again. A couple of years previously, it required cities to create rules that would allow accessory dwelling unit development in single-family residential zones. And then as of January 1st of this year, it further limited cities' local control to place certain conditions upon the development of accessory dwelling units. So current state law, cities are required to allow the development of accessory dwelling units, and state law provides provisions for junior accessory dwelling units as well. What that means is in a single family R1 zone on a single family lot doesn't really mean 1 unit anymore. It means up to 3 units now. That's really important for how we get to achieving 1,700 units. So the state has given some guidance on how you can count accessory dwelling units towards meeting the RENA numbers. The good news is yes, they can count. There is in classic government process, they created a very complex formula for how they would do that. But we anticipate being able to account for several hundred of the allocation that we have through accessory dwelling unit development. Now that's not perfect, however, because one of the big restrictions that California bars local jurisdictions from requiring for accessory dwelling units now is we can't require on-site parking. We cannot.
That's a complete other issue now.
Hey,
Parking issue.
Yeah, so if you live in a parking impacted neighborhood, that the state law is not going to help that. So you solve one problem, you create, you fix one leak over here, two more spring out from over here. So that's just the challenge we're facing right now.
so that probably will go into that parking plan we talked about the other day for the city.
Right, and the citywide parking master plan,
Right.
the project team, they have that in their analysis. They've got that in mind. Just the ramifications of the accessory dwelling unit laws in the state and how that's going to, having some predictions and some recommendations for how we account and manage that moving forward.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. Any other questions? No? So are we then down to staff communication time? We don't have
Sure.
any do we need to make a recommendation on this, Tim, by the way?
No, it's just, if you have any, if you had any thoughts, and these were great questions, about some really important aspects of this. It's going to be, like I mentioned, I'm not super optimistic. I'm just being realistic about, what the appeals process is, what fruit is going to be born from that. I'm not holding my breath for some dramatic change to our numbers. Frankly, I don't think any local jurisdiction is. But you got to fight the fight. So no, I'm good with just receiving file from the commission at this point.
Do we need to think about rezoning for those few open lots downtown? They probably are now quite commercial lots, right?
Well, you're probably talking about areas that fall within the San Fernando corridor specific plan.
Right.
And if so,
That's right.
yeah, the vast majority of those are zoned for mixed use, including residential.
Yeah.
So we're probably more than halfway there. That said, we never anticipated 1,700 additional units. So we'll take a second look at that and see if those numbers need to change.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem fair for the size of our city. Some of these other cities that are probably 5 times larger than the city of San Fernando have half as many units that they need to build.
The numbers are big for a lot of communities. I can't think of too many that didn't receive a large number for them and for their context. And just one number I'll give you off as a basis of comparison: City of Los Angeles, their arena allocation is somewhere in the ballpark of 455,000 units.
455, 577.
Palmdale could get a few more. Shoot, they only have like 6,000 there. They got plenty of space there.
Yeah, and that was part of the, that was part of the just all the politics that was going on around adopting the methodology. Like I mentioned, the original methodologies that were being proposed, there was a slightly larger share that the inland counties were going to bear and the inland regions were going to bear. and ultimately the regional council SCAG adopted a methodology that pushed some of those units out of the inland counties and more towards the coastal areas, and so we were not a beneficiary there. We ended up with more units as a result of that.
Oh.
Geez. Some of these places I'm familiar with. I mean, industry doesn't have any place to build any housing anyway. And they have a great tax base, so you got all the money in the world and nothing to build. Lord help us. Oh well, okay. All right, any other comments, guys?
How do they determine the low income, medium income, moderate income? Was that based on the rent, on the rent of the property, or?
No, those are, in terms of who's eligible? Yeah, yeah.
In terms of how would they determine whether the property is a low income property or a very low income property? Is that based on the rent amount?
So that's in terms of, you know, what what that would be set at, but the actual income categories of who would qualify for those units are determined based on a proportion of LA County median income. So very low is, you know, 30% area median income or lower. Low is from 30 to 50%. You know, moderate is from 50 to 80. And then above moderate is 80 and above. And those numbers are wrong. Those numbers are wrong, but, you know, it gives you a sense.
Right. Good stuff. Tough stuff, but good stuff.
Tough stuff, yep.
Being prepared helps. Okay. Any other questions before do we need to go on to staff communication then? You got anything else for us, Tim?
Sure. The only staff communication that I have is I do want, I've got two items. One, I just wanted to give a general update on COVID-19, local regulations and limitations on our operations, and kind of where things lay right now. Back in end of August, the governor issued basically a blueprint for Safer California, and it simplified and color-coded a 4-tier system of reopening the economy. And as you hit 2 different metrics, your county, so it's county by county, could qualify to move progressively down into less and less restrictive tiers. And as you do that, then you can reopen and resume some economic activity. You could resume schools, in-person instruction, things of that nature. So LA County, we started in the highest restrictive category, the purple category, which is, really when you really have a widespread infection rate and propensity for COVID-19. Over the last month and a half or so, a number of counties have been able to progress down into the next stage and then the next stage. So our neighbors to the south of us, Orange County, they've progressed into tier 2, the next tier down in terms of restrictions. Ventura County last week progressed into the orange category, the red category from purple. However, Los Angeles County, where we are, we have not been able to hit both of the metrics to be able to qualify to move down into the next tier. So we still remain in the purple tier, which is the most restrictive tier. When and if we are able to move down, that's when you will see the ability for schools to have greater ability to reopen in-person instruction. You'll start to see restaurants be able to consider, in-room dining again, and, just a number of different restrictions will be lifted. The capacity restrictions will move up over time. Unfortunately, we're not there. So that the biggest challenge right now, just the message we want to convey to people is continue. I know it's difficult. This has been going on for, it seems like, an eternity, but social distancing, wearing face covering, isolating, quarantining, not gathering socially. These things are just super critical. Everybody, wants to resume some level of normalcy again, and our rates of spread of coronavirus in LA County we are our own enemy in terms of not being able to reopen sooner. And you're seeing our neighbors being able to reopen. So I do just want to convey that here locally. The numbers in San Fernando still remain high. That's indicative of really the entire Northeast San Fernando Valley. We've been disproportionately affected. We have a lot of essential workers that live in these areas, live and work in these areas. And so it's not surprising, but it is the stark reality of what's happening right now. The last update I'll provide is just on a staffing standpoint. I don't know, when the next time we'll have the opportunity to gather and chat again. But I did want to announce a couple sad announcements. So some of our staff will be retiring. They have announced their retirement before the end of the year. So our building and safety supervisor, Francisco Villalba, and one of our community preservation officers, Rosa Guzman, they've announced their retirement over the next couple months. So we're sad. We're very sad to see them go. Really happy for them for their next chapters, however.
Absolutely. Tough to replace. Okay.
Yeah, how are they going to do that, Tim? Building and safety, who's going to be doing the inspections?
Yeah, we're working on a plan right now, which would be a combination of creating an opportunity for a special assignment for our code enforcement officers to go get certified in building inspections, and if they do so, then they'll have the ability to perform a big part of this function as well. They're already enforcing the code as part of their job, and so this is an evolution of that. So we have some staff that's interested in that opportunity, and then it'll be combined with, frankly, utilizing third-party building inspectors to help us out as well.
So there goes our homeless person too.
And thank you for mentioning that. Rosa, if you weren't aware, she's been the city's point person for our annual homeless count that occurs every January. And so, she's moving on. So she's counted her last homeless count. Nonetheless, the Community Development Department, we're really committed to continuing to participate in that, and so we'll be continuing on with that.
Okay. Any comments, guys, for the man here?
Negative.
No comment.
That was good presentation, Tim.
Thank you.
Not a fun topic, but a good presentation. All right.
I'll try to bring a more fun, more like a more upbeat presentation next time.
Maybe a little music in the background or something, you know?
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna have to be creative for sure.
That was good. It was good.
How about some dancing girls? That'd be cool. I like to get in trouble, so what the hell, why not? Okay, if there's nothing else, then I would take a motion to adjourn.
A motion to adjourn.
I second that.
Anybody object? And we're done. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.